Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a really sweeping, incredibly moving narrative called Bread, Salt, Stone. We are going to follow the multi-generational story of the Petrović family living high up in the mountainous Balkans. And by looking at their story, and specifically by tracking the fate of one single ice-cold mountain spring, we're going to get a profound look at the true human cost of modernization. We'll be tracing how entirely whole societies shift from having a deep, lived connection with the earth to an abstract, data-driven obsession with ownership, and we'll see exactly what happens to the human soul in the middle of that transition.
Just think about this for a second. A man who counts stones doesn't know stones. That observation was made back in 1896 by the family patriarch Petar Petrović. Now, Petar was a man who had his hands physically ruined by decades of building dry stone walls. He knew the land intimately. He felt it. And this quote perfectly sets up the core conflict of our entire explainer. We're looking at this massive battle between a deep experiential knowledge of nature, knowing the land by touch, by sweat, and the modern world's obsession with data, measurement, and turning literally everything into a quantifiable number.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, when land becomes property.
So, picture this. We are traveling back to the late 19th century to the tiny village of Rujište, which is a settlement just clinging to the stony mountains above the city of Niš. Traditionally, the people here didn't understand their relationship to the earth through paperwork. It was all about absolute persistent presence. It was about being truly of a place. Petr and his young grandson Staniša, they earned their plot of land through generations of sweat. The land wasn't a commodity to be bought and sold. They were literally an extension of it. But then in 1896, everything changes. Government surveyors arrive from the city in these tight suits, carrying theodolites and measuring chains. And in just a matter of hours, they completely flattened a deep living ecosystem into abstract lines on a piece of paper, replacing that rich lived relationship with simply owning a property on a registered deed.
And what did all that deep, complex, generational reality get reduced to? A single number, 8.3 recala. That is the exact measurement the surveyors formally wrote down for the Petrović plot. By measuring the land this way, the surveyors completely ignored the underground water connections, the deep aquifers, and the mountain spring that was the absolute lifeblood of the village. They mapped the surface terrain perfectly, but they entirely missed the actual reality of the ecosystem.
Now, once the land becomes just lines and numbers on paper, it becomes incredibly vulnerable. After those surveyors mapped the village in 1896, a city merchant named Dmitry Markovich swoops in and exploits this brand new paper reality in 1908. Markovich realizes that the spring is technically sitting on state land, so he uses modern laws to legally steal the communal spring for a commercial bottling operation. Staniša fights a years-long legal battle, but he has no paper deed. The system doesn't care about his history. And so, by 1912, Staniša is completely forced to abandon his ancestral home.
Which brings us to Section 2, man becomes a mechanism.
With his land legally taken from him, Staniša has to migrate away from the rural mountains and down into the urban, industrial city of Niš. He gets a job at a brick factory. Now, back on the mountain, farm work had a really varied seasonal rhythm, right? Plowing, planting, building, harvesting. It required diverse skills and incredibly deep knowledge. But the factory? The factory is just 4 steps. Load clay, wheel it to the station, dump it, return. And he repeats this 8,000 times a shift, 6 days a week. This soul-crushing robotic repetition gradually strips away his vast agricultural knowledge, and it essentially turns Staniša himself into a broken, specialized mechanism.
And while Staniša is slowly turning into a machine, the 20th century just violently churns on around him. In 1915, he survives the deadly Great Retreat through the freezing mountains of Albania during World War I. Fast forward to 1941, he endures the brutal German occupation of Niš and narrowly escapes the Buban massacres. By 1944, a new socialist state is established. Through all of these massive historical shifts, empires falling, states rising, Staniša just numbly endures. He goes to his shifts, he loses his wife Milana to disease, and his son Petr completely disappears into the machinery of war. Staniša survives it all, sure, but he is completely hollowed out inside.
Moving on to Section 3, the indifferent spring.
Meanwhile, back up on the mountain that Staniša left behind, subsequent modern systems decide it's their turn to try and master nature. In 1961, the new socialist state forms the Bratstvo, or Brotherhood, agricultural collective. They seize the abandoned mountain plots and attempt to apply modern scientific agriculture. They actually pipe the ancient spring for scientific irrigation.
But they treated this rugged rocky mountain like an abstract math problem to be solved with pumps and chemical fertilizers, totally ignoring the traditional ecological limits of the landscape. And guess what? Nature simply refused to be mechanized. This led to the total collapse of the collective by 1964. But right before the state took over the land, Staniša made his own final journey. In August 1960, a 73-year-old, physically broken Staniša walks miles out of the city all the way back up to the abandoned village of Rujište. This is really the emotional climax of his life. He climbs up to the mountain pasture one last time, not to claim it back, but simply to put his ruined, arthritic hand into the freezing, flowing water of the spring. And there, resting on the flat stone beside the water, having finally reconnected with the only place he was truly of, he passes away peacefully under the stars.
That brings us to Section 4. Memory turns into data.
Look at how this living, breathing spring was progressively reduced to mere data over the course of a century. Back in 1896, it was a cadastral boundary line for property. By 1974, a university researcher named Marko Stanković arrived and literally reduced the spring to hydrological data point number 77 in his dissertation. And by 1986, Staniša's own great-great-granddaughter, Ana Petrović, who was a student from Belgrade and had never actually known the land, arrived to turn the dying village into an ethnographic case study. That deep physical connection to the land, it was completely gone, fully replaced by academic archives.
And the final result of all this modernization and total abandonment? Zero. By 1987, after the very last stubborn resident, a man named Jovana, freezes to death in his home, the population of Rujište hits zero. The village officially ceases to exist as a human settlement. And honestly, this quiet rural death perfectly mirrors the impending violent collapse and fragmentation that would absolutely tear Yugoslavia apart in the 1990s.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5. What survives the ruins?
So by 1999, Staniša's great-great-granddaughter Ana inherits the legally claimable deed to the Petrović plot. But she realizes pretty quickly that the paper is physically worthless to her. She's a city dweller, she can't farm it. She realizes that ownership was actually always the wrong framework. And it really forces us to ask, does it matter if a place is completely forgotten? Seriously, what good is a meticulously kept archive of a dead world if the actual, lived human connection to the land is permanently severed? What happens when you own the paper, but you don't know the stones?
And yet, despite everything, the spring keeps flowing. Through the Ottomans, through property laws, through 2 world wars, through communism, and through the complete collapse of Yugoslavia, the cold water just keeps pushing up from the deep earth. Human laws, borders, and empires, they all crumble to dust. But the mountain spring remains entirely indifferent, outlasting all of our modern systems. It really makes you wonder, as we continue to modernize and turn our entire world into data, what essential human connections are we leaving behind in the ruins? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.